Hello everyone, Nadezhda here and welcome to the first BIM and Tonic Live here from Belgrade, so I hope you're ready. I'm actually quite nervous about this. I was actually trying to make it as latest as possible. Let me just turn this off. I hope you forgive me, I still don't know how this technology works, so I will start with the lesson right away. So today's lesson is going to be all about the title blocks, and it's going to be about creating one professional title block for your company, and the title block with the parameters, and title block that contains a lot of these stuff that you need for your projects, like how to handle the scale and how to handle the drafting views and all sorts of stuff. So let's begin with the lesson. I'm first going to go to the file, new, and I'm going to create the new title block family. I'm going to go to the metric units, and I am going to go to the title blocks families, and I'm going to choose any of these options. Let's say, for example, A1, and I'm going to click open. Now, first step is something that you probably all know, and it is actually the creation of lines. It's also the most simple step of all. Of course, it is going to be done with the line tool. And I'm going to choose the rectangle options, and I'm going to offset it by, for example, 25 millimeters. I click tab to invert it, and we draft the lines. By the way, I am interested to see where my viewers are from, so post in the comments where you are from and I will look into the comments. And now that I have created these lines, I am going to create a couple of more lines. I click the line tool, and I'm going to create something like around 100 centimeters width, and let's say, for example, 85 or 90 height. It's going to be this little smaller title block. I'm going to trim the lines. And I am going to take the line tool, and I'm going to add a couple of boxes inside of this. Let's just offset it, for example, by 5. And I am going to copy it, for example, let's say for 30 millimeters. I will also copy it by 5. And the next item can be, for example, let's say 15. Something like this. And I am going to split these lines. and maybe add few more items to make this title block look a little bit nicer. I'll just now mirror it. And this first part of the title block creation is mostly just creating the lines, and later on we are going to be jumping into the parameters and also a few other interesting hacks that we have with these title blocks. They actually have a lot of cool features that we are going to explore today. I just trim it, and now I'm just going to copy some of these lines. And I'm going to trim them like before. And this seems to be a little bit thin, so I think I'm going to just make it a little bit higher, for example by 5 millimeters. I just selected these lines and I move them by 5. I will do the same for this one. And I will copy all of these lines. And now I'm just going to save this family just so it isn't called family 1. And I will save it somewhere on my computer. And this is what it looks now, and I can add now the parameters. And as you know, the title blocks, they actually contain the parameters that are mostly going to be in this project information option. And when you go to the manage option and you go to project information, here you have all the parameters that are related to your building. They contain the project address, name, number, client, author, etc. And they also read the sheet parameters, basically the information that you have on your sheet, for example, sheet name, sheet number, etc. But you can also create the shared parameters as well. So today we are going to explore these parameters a little bit more, and we are going to learn what we can do with them. So for the beginning, we can go to the create option and we can add the new label. What label does, it basically it creates the parameter value, it reads it from some other parameter and then adds it to our title block. So I go to the label option and I'm going to click on my first row, and it is going to show me the properties where I can find all of these parameters that can be read from our project. So I go here and I find, for example, the sheet name. Let's just first go with the sheet name, and I click on it and I click on this arrow to get it here on the parameters option. I click OK, and now we have the sheet name parameter that is going to be read from this sheet in the project and in this family. The first thing that we can do is actually change the font, because this font and the height of the font is not really ideal. So I go to the option edit type and I'll just duplicate this 8 millimeters one, and let's just create one that is, for example, 6 millimeters. And I'm going to be using Arial Narrow, and I'm going to turn this one into the bold option. And I will check this bold check mark. What I also need to do is I'm going to center this with the horizontal align, because I want this to be always in the center of my box. So I will just make sure to extend this box a little bit and make sure that the text is always central and that this central horizontal align is on. In the label option, I'm going to add the next parameters, and you can basically add any parameters that you want. For example, let's add the project name here, and let's find the project name parameter and click OK. I'm also going to turn it into the same 6mm bold font, and I'm also going to set the horizontal align to center. And what I also want to do is I want to get rid of this white fill behind the text. So I go to the edit type, and instead of opaque background, I choose the transparent and I click OK. Next option we are adding is going to be address, and I also go to the label and I will add the project address parameter. And now, instead of 6mm bold, I am going to create one font that is, for example, 4mm regular font. I change the text size to be 4. And I'm also going to turn off the bold option. And I am going to align it to center again. And make sure that this text box is big enough to fit this label. Next, what I'm going to do is I'm going to add one more line somewhere around here. And first, before adding anything else, I actually want to add the text, regular text, because the difference between labels and text is that text is pretty much the regular text. It doesn't read anything, it just is the fixed text, while label reads the parameter from the project. But I do want to actually have some nicer text that comes before the name, and I don't want it to be with the same font, so I'm going to create the new text. And I'm going to take, for example, the 4mm text. I can add prefix to our parameter, but generally what I do want is to have the completely different text type. So I'm going to create it as a text instead of the prefix inside of the label. So I'm going to be choosing Arial Narrow, and I'm going to be choosing 4mm text size, and I'm going to select bold. I click OK. And now I'm just going to add a couple of the parameters, but first let's just give them a name. For example, project number, then the designer, then the drawn by parameter, and in the end scale. We are also going to learn how to handle the different scales inside of the same sheet. And we are going to learn how to create the parameter that will let us handle that more easily. Let's just align the text to be something like that, and then let's add a few more labels. I go to the create option and I add the label, and I'm going to go back to this 4mm regular text, and here I'm going to add the project number as the parameter. And then after that, I can add the designer. I find the design by parameter. And I make sure all of these text boxes do not go to be longer than my text box, than my family text box. So I make sure just to make them aligned with the boundary of this box. So I go to the create option, I add a few more labels, and I'm going to find the drawn by parameter. And I'm also going to add one image. Here I'm just going to add one logo so we can go through adding the images in the title blocks. So I go to the insert option and I choose import image. And I'm just going to find some image from my computer. Let's just find it where it is. I select the image and I click open. And now I place the image on my title block. I just grab it by these handles and I stretch it a little bit. It's going to look something like this. I'm going to stretch it a little bit more. And this is basically how you add images to your title blocks if you have some company logo or any other kind of image that you need. So I load this into the project and let's see how it looks. I will just open one random sheet from this default file, and I'm going to choose this one title block that we created, and let's see how it looks. I will just make sure that the scale of this view is 200, for example, just so it's not too big, and this is what it looks like. Basically, what we need here is to actually make sure that the parameter of address fits this box, and since address is actually the multi-line text, you can either create it as the double text, few rows text, or you can create it as one row. For example, if I were to enter here, I can say, for example, street name, number, city, and click OK. And this way it's not going to be in the few rows, but if you need it to be in the few rows, you can basically make this box a little bit bigger. I actually wanted to rename this, but I've left out another letter, and I click OK. So as I said in the beginning, all of these parameters that we have here are going to be from the project information tab and from the sheets themselves. So you can either update everything here, or you can go to the project parameters, project information parameters, and update everything that you have here. It doesn't matter whether you are doing this for sheets or you are just starting the project. It is good practice to always fill this part, because here you have the most important information about these projects, and all of these information are going to be read in both the title blocks, schedules, and many other places. So it's a good thing to actually fill out these parameters right in the beginning of your project. So I'm going to fill the organization name. Some description, building name, let's just call this the workshop project. And let's just add it the today's date. Let's see what date it is today. It is the 24th June 2026. Status can be active. And let's just insert some random information here. I'm also going to call this the workshop project, and let's just give it the name of, for example, 2026-06, and click OK. And as you can see, most of these parameters get filled instantly. And what we have here, what we need to fill is actually these sheet parameters that are actually the information that are being read here in the identity data of the sheet itself. So here we have the sheet number and the sheet name, and we can also find all of these parameters that are the parameters about the designers, checkers, the people who worked on the project. So let's just, for example, say designed by Nadezhda and drawn by also Nadezhda. And as you can see, all of this gets filled instantly. And the next thing that we should cover is actually this scale, because I'm just going to add 2 dots here, just so it looks like everything else here. And when we are adding the scale, we have also the label for scale. And I just go to the label tool again, and I'm going to be adding the scale label. And I click OK, and I add this label to my project. I load it into the project, and as you can see, the scale is read instantly, but the main problem with the scale is whenever you have the couple of drawings in one title block, in one sheet, that have the different scale, what happens is, let's just add some other drawing that isn't already on this sheet. Let's add this, for example. As you can see now that I have 2 drawings that actually have the different scales, they have the as indicated label here. This is not something that we want, at least not in this sheet where we have 2 views. So we go back to this title block, and I'm going to leave this scale that already exists, and I'm going to add another label. Actually, before adding the label, I will go to the shared parameters and create the shared parameter for this scale. So I am in the shared parameters file, and I'm going to create the new parameter that I group under the sheet parameters, and I click new. And I'm just going to call it, for example, dummy scale. And data type is going to be text, because if we leave it as the number, we are not going to be able to insert the value in the format that we need. So I click OK. OK once again, and now I go to the label and I add the new label. Here I am going to create the new parameter, and I'm going to click select here to select from the shared parameters. I choose the sheet parameters and dummy scale, I select it and I click OK. Now I just transfer this dummy scale here and I click OK. And now I'm going to place them one over another. I'm going to be keeping both of them because I actually want to create a system where I can use both of them, and basically all of these sheets that have only one scale of them, where the scale can be read automatically. On these sheets I am going to leave this regular scale parameter, but on the other sheets where I actually have few scales, I'm going to be able to turn that parameter off and then use this manual one. To do that, I go to the family types option, and I am going to first assign the visibility parameter to the scale. So here I'm just going to temporarily hide the new scale that we created, and I'm going to select this one scale. Now I'm going to go to the visibility option and I'm going to check this rectangle here to create the new visibility parameter. I create a new parameter and I'm going to call it the regular scale, just scale. I'm going to choose instance here so I don't have to create a new type for each scale that I have. So I am going to choose the visibility here and I'm going to click OK. And now this one has the parameter, but we also have to add the parameter to the other one. So I reset the temporary height and I am going to add one more visibility parameter. I create a new parameter and I also create it as the instance, and I'm going to create it as the dummy scale. And I'm going to choose visibility once again. I click OK and OK once again. Then before we load this into the project, what I'm going to do is I go to family types and the dummy scale, I uncheck this value because I want it to be invisible by default. So I click OK and I load it into the project. What happens now is before we can actually use this parameter, we actually have to create it here in the project as well, because unless we do that, we cannot use it. So I go to the project parameters and I'm going to create a new parameter and I select shared parameters and I click select. I find this parameter in this group and I click OK. Here I can either group it as the sheets or the title blocks, it doesn't matter, whatever you choose is going to be correct. I like it to be with the sheets. I like choosing sheets here because that way it is easier for me because it's categorized with the rest of the parameters that are similar to this one. So you can choose either this or title blocks, whatever you choose, it's fine as long as you group it under the text. I click OK and I click OK once again. And what I get is now that I can actually find it here within the sheets. Let's see where it is. And here it is in the dummy scale, and I can, for example, say that the scale is 1 to, let's say, for example, 1 to 50, and then the scale of 1 to 100. And first we have to actually get rid of this existing parameter. So I uncheck this scale parameter and I check this dummy scale. And as you can see, now we have the value that we wanted to create. And this is basically how we do those main parameters. Whichever parameter you need for your title block, basically that parameter is going to be available to you. And now I want to actually create the revision clouds. I want to create the schedule that can read the revisions from my sheets, and actually to do that I go back to my title block and I go to the option view. I will find the revision schedule and I will choose which of these revision information I want to keep in my schedule. So I will, for example, get rid of the revision sequence and I will leave these revision number, revision description and revision date. I click OK. And I also want to apply these similar graphical settings to them. For example, I want the font to be Arial narrow 4 millimeters. So I select these three titles and I go to the font option and I will choose Arial narrow and let's say, for example, 4 millimeters. I can also check here if I want it to be bold, italic, underline or any other option, and I click OK. I also do the same for title. I will select this main title, I go to the font, and I'm going to choose Arial Narrow, and in this case I choose, for example, 5 millimeters bold. And now that I have created it, I can go to my title block and I will find this schedule under the views. So I will just pull it here, and maybe I can even include it here. You just have to make sure that you leave enough space for your revision schedule and for the number of revisions that you will have in your project, because if you have a lot of revisions, as the revisions are added, basically the schedule is going to become longer and longer, so you are going to be needing a lot of space for it. So I will just make sure to fit this well, and I just stretch it a little bit so it looks something like this. I'm going to make sure it's a little bit longer, and it is something like this, but it's too long for this title block, so I can actually omit the revision word from it because I don't want it to be longer than the rest of my title block. So I'm just going to remove this revision word because it's obvious that it is about revision, since the title of it is revision schedule. And now I just make sure that it is going to be the nice size. Let's just get this to be a little bit shorter, and it's something like this. And now we can load it into the project. And what happens now is that whenever we have some revision on this schedule, on this title block, basically we can add this to the schedule that we have here. We can add revisions several ways. First option in any option that you are using is going to be here in the additional settings. We first have to create these revisions, and I'm just going to cover this in very little detail. I'm going to be calling it revision 1, for example. Let's leave that as default, and let's just add it some random date. For example, let's say that this revision was issued today, and the next one is going to be issued, let's say, for example, next month. It doesn't matter. You can call revisions however you want to call them. Let's just say, for example, work in progress submission. And let's call this, for example, the SD submission. And click OK. So there are two ways that you can add the revisions. First way is just clicking here on the revisions on sheet, and here checking whether that revision is shown here. So if I were to check these two revisions here in this option, as you can see, now we get this revision schedule that shows all of the parameters that we have assigned it in the title block families. The other way is adding the revision cloud. So for example, when I go to the sheet and I go to the revision cloud option, I can choose the revision that I'm going to be working in, and I'm just going to add some revision clouds. For example, let's say this one. And as you can see, instantly this first revision is going to show up in our revision schedule. We can also add the second revision, let's say something like this, and as you can see, we also get the second one. So these are two ways that you can add the revisions to your title blocks, but the first step is always actually adding the entire revision schedule here. So we can now go to the next item we have here, and the next item we have is actually adding the drafting view option. If we want our sheets to have the option of having that red line and the red text that reads the drafting views, we can actually go to we can just draft some of these lines. Let's say, for example, I will just use one red line. First I have to create the red line, and I go to the manage and I go to the object styles, and I'm going to create the new subcategory under the title block. So I create the new type of line, and I'm just going to call it the red line tree, number of tree thickness, and I'm just going to assign it the line weight of tree, and I'm going to make sure that it is the red line, and I click OK. I will choose also the solid line, and I click OK, and I select this line, and I'm just going to choose the line that I have just created, and this is now red line, and I'm going to add some new text. And I will create, for example, 20 millimeters. I will also create the red font, and I'm going to call it the 20 millimeters red bold. And I will choose the red color, and I will make sure to check the bold option here. And I am going to choose to type in draft here, and basically this is going to be the type of the annotation that we are going to be showing in the work in progress views, in the draft views. Basically this indicates that these are not the submission drawings, but actually the draft drawings. And in the edit type, I'm going to choose the transparent option and click OK. So now we have this option, and I want to actually select all of these items, and I also want to add the visibility parameter. I click on this parameter types, and I click on the new parameter, and I'm going to be creating the new parameter that is going to be the drafting view, for example. Actually, draft view. Here I'm also going to choose the visibility, and I'm also going to create it as instance, so I can just pick any of the title blocks I want without creating the new type. So I click OK, and I load this title block in the project. And as you can see, this now becomes this option stays here. But what is handy to do actually, and that is basically what we just did with the scale parameter. What we want in that case is actually this option, this visibility parameter, to not be the default parameter. So I go to the family types, and I'm just going to turn this off. I make sure to go to load into project, and that way I don't get this option anywhere unless I turn it on. So basically, if I want this sheet to have this draft option, I can just turn it on here, and I can just select the sheets that I want, and then they will have the drafting option, but no other sheet will have that option enabled. And this is the way to do this, to add this option. And this is actually it about this lesson. I'm just going to now have the Q&A session for the members. Basically, all of the channel members can pose the question, can ask any of the questions in the chat room. So feel free to ask anything about the title blocks and about today's lesson. So since there are no questions today, this is it about today's lesson. Thank you very much for attending this live stream. It will be available for the next 7 days, and then it will move to membership only vault. Thank you for watching and see you in the next lesson. Bye!